No Wolf Among Us 2, no Stranger Things, and above all else, no end to The Walking Dead final season. It's going to end about halfway through with episode 2, and after this incredibly long journey, we won't be granted an ending. This is partially the reason that I hate the idea of episodic games. If something goes wrong, it just ends up being a game with an incomplete story. But that's not what this is about. If you haven't heard, Telltale is shutting down. The company known for the interactive cinematic games will no longer be around, and it's taken a lot of people by complete surprise. A small skeleton team will remain together to continue working on Minecraft story mode for Netflix, but as far as gaming projects go, Telltale is history. And I want to use this time to bring to light the fact that this in turn means that many people lost their jobs, people who are incredibly creative and innovative, breathing life into this narrative style of video game. For the most part, this video is going to focus on the games that made Telltale what it is, but behind every game is a hardworking crew. And though this is a sad time for the company, they all deserve a huge shout out of praise and support for the time and effort they put into so many incredible games. With that said, I want to spend this video looking at some of the games that Telltale has put out there that will keep this company etched in our hearts forever. Let's start from the very beginning, way back in 2005. Well, technically the company was founded in July of 2004, but it didn't release its first game until February 11th, 2005, a game known as Telltale Texas Hold'em. And funny enough, this is the only game with original Telltale characters, since all the other games involve some form of licensing. In reality, this game is nothing. It's Texas Hold'em at its absolute basic. Why did they make this when so many of their other games are these interactive dramas? Well, it was a test. Telltale Games have been using the Telltale tool engine from day one, all the way until now. This game was their way of testing the engine. It's a decent game considering it's just a card game, but it's important in terms of history, and for that reason, I wanted to at least mention it here. It's also not the last card game Telltale made, but more on that later. For now, let's jump into the first real game that may look familiar, at least to some of you. Bone Out from Boneville. Released September 15, 2005, this was their first adventure game, different drastically in style from their previous game. And as mentioned before, Telltale almost exclusively deals with licensed IPs, and this is no different, being based off of Jeff Smith's Bone comic series. This isn't the only Bone game they made either, with Bone the Great Cow Race coming out a few months later, in April of 2006. The Bone games were the first ones to really resemble what Telltale is all about now, with low-intensity gameplay and choices in dialogue. This game also works loosely as a point and click, where you use your mouse to navigate the screen and find things to interact with. Story-wise, this is not as intense as some of their other projects, but you can see the early inspiration, and Bone is still a fun story to experience. The one thing all three of these games have in common, however, is that they are not episodic, meaning that when they came out, you were able to beat the game start to finish. The gameplay itself is very reminiscent of later Telltale games, but these later releases are also all episodic. So when did this trend start? Well, fairly early on, with the game called CSI: 3 Dimensions of Murder. But even though the game was split into different episodes, or cases, they were all released on the same day, so it isn't too much different from the Bone games. You'd think the story would be great, since an investigation-style game in the Telltale style of gameplay would work well together, but this game received a mixed reception, getting only a 67 on Metacritic. Personally, I found this game to be rather fun. The story in it was good, and the crime scene investigation were fairly in-depth for a 2006 video game. Most complaints are about the graphics, which admittedly aren't too great, but if you can look past that, there's a lot of fun to be had in this one. This wasn't the only CSI game they released either, with CSI Hard Evidence coming out in 2007 and CSI Deadly Intent coming out in 2009. These later two entries also found their way to the Nintendo Wii. So we still haven't answered the question, which was the first Telltale game to be released episodically over a period of time? Well, it's time to finally reveal that answer. This, my friends, is one of Telltale Games' most stapled franchises, Sam & Max. Sam & Max Saved the World saw its first episode released on October 17th, 2006, and the next 4 episodes came out in a period between then and April of 2007. At the time, not many games did this, and there were concerns about how this game would do, but it was an absolute hit. Yeah, I wasn't being sarcastic when I said this is one of Telltale's staple franchises. This game was important to them, for a number of reasons. A few years ago, in 2005, LucasArts was set to develop a game known as Sam & Max Freelance Police. Long story short, it got cancelled, and a part of the team working on that game separated. That team formed what is now known as Telltale Games. Sorry I didn't mention that earlier, but I wanted to save it as a surprise plot twist. Telltale Games is essentially just a branch of employees from LucasArts' development team, and they seem set on reviving the Sam & Max franchise, with or without the company. Lucky for them, it was a success, and they went on to release 2 more Sam & Max games, Beyond Time and Space in 2007 and The Devil's Playhouse in 2010. So let's fast forward a bit. In between Sam & Max and CSI, a number of smaller games came out, including some poker games, a Wallace and Gromit game, and even a Monkey Island game. One in particular that I really enjoyed was Strong Bad's cool game for attractive people, based on the Homestar Runner web cartoon. Such a random thing to base a video game off of, especially seeing as how the game found its way to the WiiWare shop, but it's hilarious and shows exactly what type of projects Telltale was open to taking on. And now, we're about to enter the golden age for Telltale. December of 2010, just 3 days before Christmas, they released Back to the Future, the game. This is one you've probably heard of, since it's gone free on Xbox Games with Gold and PS Plus, as well as having releases on the phone, PC, and Nintendo Wii. This was the last Telltale game to be released on a Nintendo console not called the Switch, save for one exception we'll get to later. It was their first real dive into the movie-to-game style, and it was met with fairly positive criticism. It was Back to the Future, alright, a new twist on the story, and they did about as good a job capturing the character's authenticity as you might expect. Considering most movie games out there are absolute garbage, Telltale clearly did their research into this project, and what resulted was a fun story. It had a slow start, but this was a good step for them. And then, they had a bit of a misstep. Jurassic Park the game. Sounds awesome in retrospect, a game based on a giant dinosaur island, and with Telltale's plot twist and storytelling, it was sure to be a hit. Except, it wasn't, at all. People did not like this, saying it was far too much like a movie, with little interaction at all. After playing it, I'm inclined to agree. Even the action sequences felt more like you were observing what was going on. Telltale did good for their own standards, but meshing interactive drama with a high action and intense Jurassic Park game just doesn't work real well. Telltale's style doesn't capture chase scenes and exploration well, and those are two things that Jurassic Park should be founded upon. Lacking those two made for what felt like an empty experience. So throw that one away, so we can clear a path. Because what came next changed this company forever. Law & Order Legacies. I'm just kidding. I'll stop stalling now. The Walking Dead, released on April 24th, 2012, and extending out to November 20th, 2012. This game was an absolute titan, and to this day, few would argue that this is the greatest game to come out of the studio. And, objectively, it was their most successful project, and by January of 2013, it had already sold more than 8.5 million copies, and more than $40 million was generated from sales. It was a match made in heaven. Instead of the typical zombie apocalypse game where you bash your way through hundreds of zombies, this was the first to really focus on the hopeless and story side of things, showing the hardships characters must face. Most games ignore things like food, water, and places to sleep, but this one didn't, and it really emphasized those points. Something as small as getting shelter for the night turned into a huge fiasco, and you don't just get an assault rifle to plow through everybody. You have to make tough decisions, like who to save, what to eat, should you steal, should you kill, and everything has an impact in the end. In fact, some decisions will carry between seasons. Make a tough choice in this game, and it'll have an impact in The Walking Dead Season 2, which was released in December of 2013. This also had one of the most touching endings of any game I've played, and I have it right up there with Final Fantasy X, Mother 3, and Heavy Rain in terms of my most emotional experiences with a video game story. Graphically, it wasn't perfect, but it was extremely unique. You can easily tell a Telltale game apart from any other game company, simply due to its own style. And though it has its glitches, it separates their stories from the rest of video games, which I think is an extremely good thing. Walking Dead also had DLC called 400 Days, released in July of 2013. As mentioned before, Season 2 came out that year, but there was so much more Walking Dead content released down the road. February 2016 saw a mini Walking Dead series centered on Michonne from the TV show, while she was on a hiatus from the group. It was shorter with only 3 episodes, but it was still a great story. New Frontier, which is basically Season 3, came out in December of 2016, and the final season came out earlier this year, in August of 2018. The second episode was released September 25th, but sadly this game will never be finished, due to Telltale shutting down. I have hopes that GoFundMe or something else will find a way to save this game, but things seem bleak. Walking Dead wasn't their only successful franchise, however. October 2013 saw the release of The Wolf Among Us, based on the Fables comic book series. It's another investigative style of game, but with a deep story that involves choice similar to Walking Dead. The story involves a place known as Fabletown, which is a small place within Manhattan. These fables must wear glamour to pass as humans, and the game centers on Bigby, the sheriff that helps deal with the problems of these fables. You meet tons of characters, including the 3 Little Pigs, Belle, Mr. Toad, Snow White, the Magic Mirror, and so many more. The story works perfect, and the use of these fables in a rundown Manhattan setting makes for a unique story. And while most of the credit for this goes to Bill Willingham, who made the comics, Telltale breathed life into this, turning it from a cult following into a game millions have been able to experience. A sequel was planned to come out in 2018, but in May, Telltale announced the studio was having some issues and would have to delay the release until 2019. In fact, this may have been the first sign of problems within the company, but nobody really looked into it much at the time. Now, obviously, the game has been cancelled. Tales from the Borderlands came next in November of 2014. I won't talk about this one much, but it is by far their funniest game, and it perfectly captures the characters and environments from the Borderlands games. The original characters fit in perfectly. Handsome Jack makes a return in this, and overall, it's a fun journey with some intense parts, and great humor. And their releases based on successful franchises just kept on going. Game of Thrones in 2014, Batman in 2016, Guardians of the Galaxy in 2017, they had so many games coming out almost constantly, and it was a beautiful thing. One of the oddballs was the Minecraft Story Mode game released on October 13th, 2015. A Season 2 for this was released a little later, and this series found its way to the Nintendo Switch. Minecraft Season 1 was also the only Telltale game released for the Wii U. Support for Nintendo didn't seem to be a huge priority until the Nintendo Switch came about. And now, we're back to the present time. Despite all these incredible games, sales seemingly were not coming in. Telltale was quoted saying that we released some of our best content this year and received a tremendous amount of positive feedback, but ultimately that did not translate to sales. And sadly, this couldn't be more true. These games all were loved by any that played them, yet somehow people didn't seem to purchase these games. A part of me wonders if people became so satisfied by simply watching other people play the story that they didn't feel compelled to buy it. Normally, I'm a believer that Let's Plays push people into buying games, but in the case of games that are built on story and being surprised, this may have actually ended up hurting Telltale. That's just speculation though, so don't take my word on anything. As mentioned earlier, Telltale isn't 100% gone, with the branch still working with Netflix on Minecraft Story Mode, and with Netflix pretty much running it now, we don't know what the future holds for these last few employees. The only question that remains is, what happens to those who pay $19.99 for this season pass? If there's an update, I'll put it on the screen, but at the time of me recording this, there has been no news about a potential refund. Over 250 employees were laid off without any severance, leading me to believe that money's tight, which might make a refund for consumers hard to get, let alone the fact that the company is completely broken down at this point. We'll see what happens, but for now, I just hope all those employees land jobs that allow them to keep making games. Telltale paved the way for so many companies, like Supermassive Games, who have made games in a similar vein like Until Dawn. Life is Strange, developed by Square Enix, also follows this trend. So even if Telltale no longer exists, their footprint on the gaming industry and the point-and-click interactive genre will live for a long time after.